My name is Charles Gascon. I'm a senior economist at the St. Louis Fed. When the pandemic hit the economy, the childcare sector was significantly impacted. It became less available in some cases, it became less reliable to families and others, and on top of that, it became much more expensive. On the availability side of things, about 30% of childcare workers left the industry, either due to fears of COVID or just the on-the-job stress that had to relate to working in that space at that point in time. Some centers had to close, and they were forced to close due to the pandemic, and they were never able to reopen. It became much less reliable in many instances, either because classrooms had to close due to COVID cases, centers had to change working hours in order to accommodate the work staff that they had, so they weren't open the same hours as they were before. And then they also had to limit some of the services that they typically would have provided, such as playgrounds not necessarily being open to the same degree that they were, food service being cut, services like that. And then last but not least, it became much more expensive. As we saw firsthand during the pandemic, many of these frontline workers saw pretty significant increases in their wages as an incentive for them to show up to work. Childcare was not an exception to this. Childcare worker wages went up 20%. And because this is such a labor-intensive industry, many of those costs were passed on to households, and overall childcare costs increased about 15%. So why is it a problem that the childcare sector lost capacity during the pandemic? As childcare became less reliable, more expensive, and in some cases just less available overall, it forced households to make much more difficult decisions between how they spend their time at home and how they choose to work. In some cases, not necessarily even taking the job that's the best match for their skills and their time allocation. And that has long-run costs to the overall economy. So where are we today? Overall, the U.S. economy has recovered quite significantly from the pandemic. Overall employment is back up above pre-pandemic levels. The unemployment rate's at some record lows, which suggests that the economy is quite vibrant, and in many ways, workers have been able to get back into the labor force and find jobs. However, we've seen that the childcare sector struggled to reach its pre-pandemic capacity. Overall employment's down about 5% from pre-pandemic levels, and that suggests in many ways that this is a constraint that's still impacting workers. So how do we break this down? Well, what might be happening are things where workers are taking jobs that are more flexible, possibly at lower pay, in order to accommodate the childcare needs that they have and the childcare that is available. They may take a job working different hours or working fewer hours. More balance within a household is another thing that we're seeing taking place in order to meet the needs that families have. An added factor that's unique to this time period that's often overlooked is just the overall demographics of the U.S. population. Our largest chunk of our population right now is aged about 27 to 36, which is really prime age years for having children. And we've seen in many cases our aging population has left many more job openings. So expanding childcare capacity or finding other means for providing childcare or more work flexibility allows many of these people to remain in the labor force and grow their careers at a time when labor demand is very strong and there's plenty of opportunities out there for people to get work if they have the resources and stability at home to seek out those opportunities. So what does this all mean for the future? With the constraints in the childcare space, ultimately, households and businesses are finding themselves making new and different decisions that may not lead to the optimal allocation of resources. Families have to seek out alternative arrangements. Only half of families right now use licensed childcare providers, so they are already looking to different means to care for their children while they're at work. This can be good in some cases, but the challenges in other cases are that the quality may not match the same quality that you can get in a more formal setting with trained teachers and providers of childcare. The simple calculation that people make is, how much does it cost for me to send my child to childcare and how much am I going to make? And if that number turns out to be negative, they'll choose to stay home. However, earnings profiles and earnings growth is pretty significant when people stay in the labor force. So when people choose to drop out of the labor force to take care of their children, they'll see a lifetime decline in their earnings that's hard to make up once they re-enter the labor force. So that's a long-term cost that it oftentimes is not accounted for when households are making these decisions and can have long-term consequences for the broader economy. Visit stlouisfed.org for more information.